Napoleon completes his transition to power by crowning himself emperor of France in 1804. Napoleon will walk down the aisle of the Notre Dame Cathedral, and he will take the crown from the Pope and place it upon his own head, naming himself emperor, and also symbolizing that he himself is more important or more powerful than the church, because in historically speaking, the Pope had been the one traditionally crowning the emperors, and now Napoleon takes the crown from the Pope and places it upon his own head, once again symbolizing how important or how powerful he viewed himself as emperor. And Napoleon's going to hope to make his empire in both larger in both Europe and in the New World. We're going to look first at Napoleon and where he did not succeed in adding lands, and actually he failed in his attempts to gain an empire in the New World. And we're looking at the island of Haiti. In 1789, the ideas of the revolution spread to the Caribbean island of Haiti, where the enslaved Africans started to demand their rights too. In other words, they wanted their freedom. Eventually, a civil war erupted, and enslaved Africans under the leadership of the Toussaint Overture seized control of the colony. 1801, Napoleon decides to take back the colony and restore its productive sugar economy. However, the French forces were devastated by disease, and the rebels proved to be fierce fighters. So after the failure, of the recapturing of Haiti, Napoleon decides to cut his losses in the Americas. He offered to sell all of the Louisiana territory, which is now most of the present-day United States west of the Mississippi River. He decides to sell that to the United States for $15 million. He does so because by giving the United States this much land, the French more than doubled the size of the United States territory in just one big swoop. He would punish the British. He said that the sale of the Louisiana territory forever assures the power of the United States. Napoleon observed that he has given England a rival, which sooner or later would soon humble her pride. So Napoleon, prophesizes that the United States will soon rise, or eventually rise, to be a great power to challenge the British authority and the British dominance on the world stage, and he will be correct in that. He also knows that by selling the Louisiana territory to the United States for $15 million, this would give them money to finance further operations in Europe, because his second goal is to enlarge his empire in Europe, and we're going to see where he succeeds at adding some lands there. So now that Napoleon has abandoned his imperial ambitions in the New World, he turns his attention to Europe. And by this time, he's already annexed the Austrian Netherlands. He's already annexed parts of Italy, and he's set up a puppet government, which is essentially a government that does what he wants, just like a puppet master pulls the strings of the puppet. He set up a puppet government in Switzerland, and now he's going to look to expand further east. Fearful of his ambitions, Napoleon's biggest rival, the British, looked to Russia, to Austria, and to Sweden to join as allies to try to stop or to halt the conquest of Napoleon. Napoleon meets this challenge with his usual boldness in a series of brilliant battles, and we're talking about 1804, 1805. In a series of battles, Napoleon crushes the opposition. A lot of times, the commanders of the opposing armies, they had a hard time predicting Napoleon's next move and would suffer big losses. And by 1805, these battlefield successes had forced the rulers of Austria, Prussia, and Russia to sign peace treaties. The successes of these battles also enabled Napoleon to build the largest European empire since the Romans. The only major enemy that Napoleon had left had not defeated was a great naval power in Britain. So in his drive for a European empire, Napoleon had only lost one major battle, and that's the Battle of Trafalgar, which was a naval defeat at the hands of the British in 1805. The Battle of Trafalgar took place off the southwest coast of Spain, and it pitted the French Navy versus the British Navy, led by Commander Horatio Nelson. Horatio Nelson was about as brilliant in naval warfare as Napoleon was in land warfare. And in a bold maneuver, Horatio Nelson splits the larger French fleet and captured a lot of enemy ships, ultimately leading to a victory against the French Navy. And now the destruction of this French fleet, or this French Navy, had two major results. First, it ensured the British supremacy on the sea for the next 100 years. And second, it forced Napoleon to give up his plans of invading Britain, and he had to look for another way to control the British. And this obsession that Napoleon had with trying to control and to dominate the British would eventually lead to his undoing. So this obsession that Napoleon had with extending the French Empire and crushing the British is going to cause him to make three major mistakes that ultimately lead to his downfall. The first mistake is going to be what's called the Continental System. The second mistake will be the Peninsular War. And the third mistake that Napoleon is going to make that will lead to the ultimate defeat of him and the destruction of his empire would be his invasion of Russia. And so at first, let's look at the Continental System. Excuse me. In 1806, Napoleon is going to set up a blockade, which is essentially the forcible closing of all ports to prevent any trade and communication between Great Britain and the European nations. This is going to, or Napoleon's going to call this blockade, or call this policy of closing off all ports in Europe to the British, he's going to call this the Continental System. The Continental System was supposed to make continental Europe more self-sufficient, and in doing so, Napoleon also intended to destroy Great Britain's commercial and industrial economy by, essentially closing off or disrupting any sort of trade that they had going on between themselves and the countries in the continental part of Europe. The problem with the Continental System is that the blockade that Napoleon had put up with the intention of destroying the British economy by stopping trade is that it wasn't nearly tight enough. There was enough gaps in it where smugglers could bring in or sneak in goods from the British into the rest of Europe. The other thing is that Napoleon's enemies were quick to take advantage of his weakness, and a lot of these countries that were in the continental Europe, they disregarded the blockade and they wouldn't recognize it, and so they continued to trade with the British. And so while the blockade weakened the British economy, it did not destroy it. Also, the British Navy, they put up their own blockade. And so the British Navy being stronger than the French Navy, they were actually, they were actually better able than the French to make a blockade work. In fact, this blockade that the British had put up against the French and against the rest of Europe is actually one of the causes for the United States and the British to fight in the War of 1812. The second mistake that Napoleon is going to make that leads to his downfall will be the Peninsular War. So the Peninsular War takes place around 1808, and this is going to be Napoleon's second costly mistake. In an effort to get Portugal, which is to the west of Spain, in an effort to get Portugal to accept this continental system, he sent an invasion force through Spain. The Spanish people protested this action, and in response, Napoleon removes the Spanish king and put his own brother Joseph on the throne. This is going to outrage the Spanish people, inflame their nationalistic feelings, and they're also the Spanish are also worried about the fate of the Catholic Church. They saw the Spanish are devout Catholics, and they saw what the French Revolution did to the Catholic Church and how it weakened the power and the influence of the Church, and they feared that the same thing would happen to the Catholic Church in Spain. And so for 6 years, from 1808 to 1814, bands of Spanish peasants, known as guerrillas, would strike French armies in Spain. And now the thing about guerrillas is that they're not the typical armies that Napoleon was used to, and Napoleon could defeat in open battle. Guerrilla fighters work in small groups, and they ambush the French army, and then they go back into hiding. This is something that this guerrilla type warfare is something that the United States is going to have trouble with in Vietnam. And so, Napoleon, through this, as a result of this guerrilla or, hide, ambush, and go back to hiding warfare that the Spanish had employed, Napoleon's going to lose about 300,000 men during this Peninsula War. In Spain and elsewhere, nationalism or loyalty to one's own country started to go or to work against Napoleon. And you started to see people, who at first welcomed Napoleon or had welcomed the French as liberators to these abusive conquerors, to these abusive monarchs that they had in place before. They now felt abused by a foreign conqueror. And like the Spanish guerrillas, these Germans, these Italians, the Swiss, and any of these other conquered people are going to turn against the French in an attempt to remove this foreign ruler and replace him with somebody of their own nationality. So now let's look at Napoleon's third and most disastrous mistake, and this comes in the year of 1812. And this is Napoleon's invasion of Russia. And so even though Alexander I, who was Tsar of Russia, had become Napoleon's ally, the Tsar refused to stop selling grain to Britain. He's one of those rulers that disregarded that blockade or that continental system that Napoleon had tried to put into place. And because of this breakdown in the alliance between the French and the Russians, Napoleon decided to invade Russia. And so in June of 1812, Napoleon and his grand army of more than 420,000 soldiers marched into Russia. And what the Russians did is that as Napoleon marched into Russia and as he had advanced into the Russian territory, the Tsar Alexander would pull his troops back. They would actually retreat. And when they retreated, they would adopt something called the scorched earth policy. And on this retreat, the Russians would burn grain fields, they would slaughter livestock, and so as the French army advanced, they were left with no food or no supplies. And so as the Russians retreated and did the scorched earth policy, and as the French army marched deeper and deeper and deeper into the French territory, their supply lines got longer and longer and longer. And so this would eventually slow down Napoleon and the French army because they had to wait for their supplies coming from the back to reach the soldiers in the front. And then, as Napoleon's army slows down, the Russian winter sets in. And so due to these very cold, temperatures, due to the lack of supplies, Napoleon's army is actually going to be defeated. And in December of 1812, as the last of Napoleon's army retreats back towards France, out of that army of 420,000, Napoleon's only left with 10,000 soldiers left to fight. And so the scorched earth policy had a tremendous consequence on the loss of life from 420,000 to 10,000. And as Napoleon is starting to retreat, his enemies are quick to take advantage of his weakness. And Britain, Russia, and Prussia, and Sweden all joined forces against him. In a few months, though, Napoleon managed to raise another army. However, most of his troops were untrained and they weren't prepared for battle. And so as he faced these allied armies of these European powers in the German city of Leipzig in 1813, it's ultimately going to lead to his defeat. And so by January of 1814, these European forces were in the capital of France, in Paris. And by April of 1814, even though Napoleon wanted to continue to fight, the resistance just wasn't there. The French could not, match the same amount of numbers or the same sheer fighting power that these European allies had put up against him. And so in April of 1814, he agreed or accepted the terms of surrender. And the victors gave Napoleon a small pension. It's like a retirement kind of, and they exiled him or banished him to the island of Elba, which is off of the Italian coast. And after they did this, they expected no more further trouble from Napoleon, but in fact they were wrong. Napoleon's actually going to escape from exile, and he's going to come back in 1815 and return to rule